Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to do a video on a term that is thrown around a lot in fishing, bass fishing in particular, but pretty much it applies to all fishing. And it's a term that as much as we use this term, we don't really define it all that often. We really haven't dove deep into what it really is and how it affects your fishing. So I wanted to do a video on this topic, which is the topic of strike zone. Okay, that's a term that I'm pretty positive you've heard before, and you know, I've used it multiple times on this channel. So first off, I do want to give you guys a big thank you for watching these videos. The SonarFishing channel has really started to grow over the last, the last year in particular, but the last couple weeks have been a lot of growth, and right now I think we're at 8,200 followers or subscribers, and I just hope that it continues to grow, and it's all because of you guys. So I wanted to say thank you for taking time out of your day to watch these videos, and so I just really appreciate it. And for those of you that are just now starting to watch my videos and watch content on SonarFishing, thank you again, and consider hitting that subscribe button. All right, so let's now dive into the concept of strike zone. So first off, I want to explain exactly what a strike zone is. So a strike zone is essentially the distance a fish is willing to move, to swim, to attack a bait, to go feed on a school of bait fish, to go after a crawfish, whatever it is. It's the distance they're willing to go go feed, and it's also the distance that they're willing to expend energy to go feed. That's another way of looking at it. But so right here we've got two different fish, okay, and one we're going to give a very small strike zone, and one we're going to give a really big strike zone. So this one we're going to say, he's willing to move 2 foot to go feed. This one is willing to go 15 feet. Now these are just random numbers. A strike zone is going to change from day to day, and these are just, I'm just coming up with these numbers just kind of illustrate the point. But here you've got a fish that is not very willing to go very far to feed. This one is willing to go a lot further, and these may be the same exact fish. It's not like one fish is always going to have a bigger strike zone all their life. It's constantly changing. It's based on the weather conditions, water quality conditions, the type of bait fish that they're feeding on. There's a lot of different factors that go into it, but I kind of wanted to break down each individual side of the spectrum, and kind of help you understand what factors may go into a smaller strike zone versus a larger one. So let's start with a smaller strike zone. So a smaller strike zone essentially means that fish may not be able to see very far, and they're not willing to go investigate something that maybe they can smell, their sense of smell, or their sense of feel with their lateral line, their sense of hearing. Fish bass in particular are very visual feeders. They can use all their other senses to go find something and go attack bait, but their sense of sight is really important for them to evaluate whether or not they want to move long distances. So when they have a smaller strike zone, oftentimes it's because of water clarity. Maybe it's very bad water clarity, so muddy water, dirty water. In those situations, usually what's happening is those fish are really gravitating towards shoreline cover. So fish are just like people. When it comes to if we can't use our sense of vision, we don't want to just be wandering around places. We want to feel safe, and just like we feel safe in our home, a fish feels safe in and around some type of cover, so something they can get right against. That's why you see flipping and pitching and more methodical presentations playing a big role when it's muddier water and the fish are really tight to cover, because you can pitch right into the stock of a brush pile, or right next to a reed or something like that, and those fish are right there. They're not willing to go very far to eat a bait, so it's like that same fish might not eat a spinner bait that's like 5 foot away from him, but a jig pitched right to the cover that he's hanging around, he's going to eat that. So water clarity, dirty water creates a smaller strike zone, the type of cover that the fish are in. So for instance, when I go down to Florida and I'm punching these thick, dense grass mats, I know that those fish are going to have a very, very small strike zone because those fish are dug into the grass. If I pitched 5 foot to the left or right of a fish, they're probably not going to try to dig their way through the grass to get to that one spot where that bait is. They may be able to feel it, they may be able to hear it, and they may be able to smell it, but they are not going to be able to see it, so they may not be willing to go explore to figure out what that is that they know is over there. And they may not even know it's there, but I'm assuming because they've got such great other senses, especially their lateral line, that's a pretty advanced sense that can allow them to feel something at longer distances, but they aren't able to see it through that dense grass, so they're not going to go over there. But if I pitched right into that little hole in the grass that those fish are in, they're going to eat it then. So that's an example of a situation where a fish has a small strike zone. Another example would be cold water. Cold water is a really good example because the colder the water, generally the smaller the strike zone, the less distance and the less energy a fish is willing to expend to go feed. And that's exactly what happens is when it gets cold, I mean, energy is at a premium. So these fish don't want to expend energy because it's very hard for them to replace that energy during the colder months of the year. So, if it's, especially when it's cold water, that's part of the reason why cold, muddy water is so difficult to catch fish, is because you have to be so precise with your presentations. Those fish really just lock down. They're not willing to go very far. They just kind of sit there, and so you have to like get a bait right in front of their nose for them to eat, because a fish that is in muddy water but it's warmer water, it may have a 5 foot strike zone, but a fish that is in cold muddy water might have a half a foot strike zone. They may just be completely locked down unless you put it right on their nose. So cold water can affect the strike zone in a way that it makes it smaller. And on the other side of the spectrum, we've got a larger strike zone. Okay, so a larger strike zone is usually when the fish are more active, they're willing to go longer distances, maybe the water's warmer, so they're able to replenish their energy. They may be burning energy a lot faster during like the warmer months of the year, but generally they can go get more food and replenish that energy, so they have wider strike zones. And of course, clear water, that's a perfect example. You go up and fish for smallmouth up north, sometimes they get really sloppy. They've got great big strike zones. Sometimes they'll go 20 or 30 feet to eat a lure. It's just crazy how big the strike zones can get. And I had one perfect illustration on Lake Norman in North Carolina, fishing for spotted bass around docks. I threw a Ned rig at the end of this dock. It was a pretty long dock. I casted to the end, and down there by the walkway close to the shoreline, I saw a spotted bass in the shadows dart from the very shoreline all the way to the edge of the dock and ate my Ned rig, and I caught that fish. It was a really cool just kind of visual to show that it had a big strike zone. It was willing to go 25, 30 feet to eat that Ned rig, so that was nuts. But yeah, so clear water, warmer conditions, and favorable weather conditions, those will increase the strike zone overall. So a couple examples that I forgot about that I think are actually pretty cool when it comes to a smaller strike zone. The first one is not one that you'd really expect the fish to have a smaller strike zone. So usually when the fish are active, they're willing to go longer distances. But we've all been in this situation where we've had a school of bass chasing a school of bait fish like shad or something like that and busting them on the surface. They're obviously actively feeding, but but you could make a bad cast, maybe go to the 5 foot to the left or 5 foot to the right, and you'd never get a bite. They wouldn't have any interest in your bait at all. But if you made a pinpoint presentation right on top of them as they're schooling on those bait fish, you'll get one of those bites. That is an example of a very, very small strike zone, and that's primarily because they're so hyper focused on that specific size bait fish, that specific school of bait fish, and they've got their blinders on. They're not paying attention to anything else in the peripheral. So they may be super active, but they've got a super, super tiny strike zone. Another example, which I think is the best representation of an actual strike zone that you can find out there, is bedding fish. Okay, the actual bed that they fan out, that 2 foot, or so, spot in the sand that the fish fan out, is a perfect representation of a strike zone. If you were to pitch your presentation outside of that area, that bed, the fish wouldn't care. The fish aren't interested in it at all. But when you drag that bait into the bed, that's the strike zone. That's where they start to get interested. So they're not willing to go off the bed to get it, but as soon as you drag it into it, that's when they start getting a little irritable and willing to go eat that bait. So that's a really cool example of a smaller strike zone. So how do you translate the knowledge of what a strike zone is into success on the water? So for instance, with a smaller strike zone, when I think that the fish have a smaller strike zone, whether it's because there's a major cold front that moved through, the water's just generally cold, it's muddy water, whatever it is that I think is causing a small strike zone, in that situation, I want to use more slow-moving and deliberate presentation. So like we already talked about, flipping and pitching, or dragging a jig in a certain area past a piece of brush, or throwing a worm, or a Carolina rig, or whatever it may be. Having a more deliberate presentation, it doesn't have to just be a bottom bouncing technique either. It could be like a jerkbait. A suspending jerkbait is a perfect small strike zone bait because it suspends in one spot. It stays in that strike zone for a longer period of time. So, so when the strike zone is smaller, go more slow and deliberate with your presentations. But on the other side of the spectrum, if the strike zone is fairly large, clearer water, warmer water, more active fish, that's when you can start using more reaction baits where, you're not making pinpoint, cast to exact cover, but you might be covering a lot of water. Those fish are willing to chase those baits and go longer distance to attack those baits. And so you can get away with a little bit of sloppiness, if you will, fishing those reaction style baits, fan casting and things like that, and just covering water when the strike zone is bigger. So smaller strike zone, get very, very specific and deliberate. Wider strike zone, cover water is kind of the basis for it. Anyways, guys, that is a kind of tutorial on what a strike zone is and how it affects your fishing. And so hopefully this concept is very helpful for you in the future. So let me know what you think about this video and the topic in the comments below. Let me know if you have any other topics you want me to cover in a video in the future. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'm going to see you out on the water.